And then he saw her. The woman from the bus was sitting on the bench, her hands folded in her lap, watching him approach. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something serious. He swallowed hard and took the final steps forward. "You came," she said softly. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She took a slow breath before looking him directly in the eye. "I need to tell you the truth," she said. "About her, about you, and why none of this is a coincidence." The boy's stomach dropped. He had no idea what he was about to hear, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was never going to be the same again. The boy's breath hitched, his mind spinning with questions. The woman's serious gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. Cars passed in the distance, people walked by without a second glance, but here, on this bench, something life-changing was about to unfold. He swallowed hard. "Who was she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Her name was Margaret," she said, "and she wasn't just some random stranger on that bus." A chill ran down his spine. He had known, deep down, that this wasn't just about a kind gesture or a simple note. But hearing it confirmed out loud made his stomach twist. "How do you know that?" The woman exhaled slowly. "Because she was looking for you." His chest tightened. "Why?" She reached into her bag and pulled out an old worn photograph. She handed it to him, and the moment he saw it, the air felt sucked from his lungs. It was a picture of Margaret, but not how he remembered her. She was younger, smiling brightly, standing next to a man he didn't recognize. But what made his hands tremble wasn't them. It was the little boy in the photo. A boy who looked exactly like him. His fingers curled around the edges of the picture. This can't be real," he whispered. The woman nodded solemnly. "I know it's hard to believe. But Margaret wasn't just some elderly lady you helped on the bus. She had been searching for you for years, and when she saw you, she knew." His pulse pounded in his ears. Knew what? The woman hesitated, as if bracing herself. "That you're connected to her in ways you don't remember." His stomach dropped. "What do you mean, don't remember?" The woman's eyes softened, but there was an urgency behind them. "Margaret was your grandmother." The words landed like a punch to the gut. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it. "That's impossible." "My grandmother," he stopped himself. The truth was, he had never known his real grandparents. His mother had always avoided talking about them. Whenever he asked, she'd change the subject or say it wasn't important. But now, standing here, it all felt too real, too big to ignore. "She lost you," the woman continued, "years ago, and she never stopped searching. That's why she wrote that note. She didn't have much time left, but she wanted you to know the truth before it was too late." His throat tightened. Too late. The woman hesitated, then said softly, "Margaret passed away last night." The world tilted. Everything inside him went still. His chest ached in a way he couldn't describe, as if something had been taken from him before he even had the chance to understand it. His mind raced back to the bus, to the way Margaret had looked at him, the quiet warmth in her voice when she had thanked him. He had thought it was just a simple act of kindness. He had no idea it was goodbye. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he blinked them away. Why didn't she say anything? The woman sighed. She was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe her. Afraid she wouldn't have enough time to explain everything. But she wanted you to know that she never stopped loving you. Never stopped looking for you. His hands clenched into fists. This was too much. Too fast. He had spent his whole life thinking he was just a normal kid with no real connections beyond his mother. Now, in a span of 24 hours, everything had changed. But before he could fully process it, the woman's expression shifted. "There's more," she said, lowering her voice. "Something she didn't get the chance to tell you." His heart pounded. "What?" She glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. Then, leaning in closer, she whispered, "Margaret wasn't just looking for you. Someone else was too." A cold shiver ran down his spine. He barely had time to react before, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something. A figure standing across the street. Watching, when his stop finally arrived, he stepped off the bus, the cool evening air brushing against his face. He hesitated for a moment, looking in the direction the elderly woman had gone. The streets were busy, filled with the usual noise of cars honking and people talking, but she was nowhere in sight. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. At home, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the note again. He unfolded it slowly, tracing the shaky handwriting with his eyes. The words were simple, but they carried a weight he couldn't explain. Asterisk, you remind me of someone I lost. Please don't ignore this. There's something important I need to tell you. Asterisk. His chest tightened. Who had she lost? And why did he remind her of them? 1,000 possibilities ran through his mind. Was she just a lonely old woman looking for someone to talk to? Or was there something more, something deeper that he wasn't seeing? The next morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. At school, his friends noticed he was distracted, but he didn't know how to explain it. Would they even believe him? It wasn't like he had some wild story, just a note from a stranger. And yet, it felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. That afternoon, as he boarded the bus again, his heart pounded. He found himself scanning the seats, searching for her. But she wasn't there. The ride felt longer than usual, the noise around him fading into the background. He pulled out the note, reading it over and over, hoping it would somehow make more sense. Then, just as he was about to put it away, something caught his eye. A woman, maybe in her 40s, sitting a few rows ahead. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. When she noticed him looking back, she quickly turned away, pretending to be focused on her phone. A strange feeling settled in his gut. He didn't know why, but something about her felt off. Had she been on the bus yesterday? Was she watching him, or was he just imagining things? He wanted to ignore it, to brush it off as coincidence. But after what had happened, he wasn't sure he could. As the bus rolled forward, the unease grew. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. The boy's grip tightened around the note as the bus rumbled forward. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something he didn't fully understand. The woman sitting a few rows ahead kept her gaze lowered, her fingers tapping lightly against her phone, but he knew she had been looking at him. Was it just a coincidence, or was she somehow connected to the elderly woman from the day before? He forced himself to look away, trying to focus on the passing streets outside the window. Maybe he was overthinking everything. Maybe he was letting his imagination run wild. But then, as the bus pulled up to the next stop, something unexpected happened. The woman stood up, but instead of heading toward the exit, she made her way down the aisle, toward him. His pulse quickened. He tried to act normal, but every nerve in his body was on high alert. When she reached his row, she paused for just a second before slipping something into his hand, a small folded note, much like the one the elderly woman had given him. Then, without a word, she stepped off the bus and disappeared into the crowded sidewalk. For a long moment, he just sat there, frozen. The piece of paper felt heavy in his palm, even though it weighed almost nothing. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this connected to the first note? Was this woman somehow involved? Slowly, he unfolded it, his breath catching as he read the words inside. Asterisk, she was looking for you. If you want answers, meet me at the bench by the library. Don't tell anyone. Asterisk, his throat went dry. He read it again, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. Who was she? The elderly woman. And what did they mean by looking for him? The bus ride home felt like an eternity. His thoughts spiraled in 100 directions, every possibility more confusing than the last. By the time he got off at his stop, his hands were shaking. Should he go to the meeting? Could he even trust this? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured the elderly woman's tired but knowing expression. The way she had looked at him, as if she saw something in him that he didn't even see in himself. Then there was the mysterious woman from the bus, her presence lingering in his mind like a shadow. By the time morning came, he had made his decision. He had to go. He had to know the truth. After school, he walked to the library, his heart hammering with each step. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt. The world around him seemed distant, muted, like he was walking straight into something bigger than himself. I know this is a lot, she said gently. But you needed to know. Margaret wanted you to know. His chest felt tight. But if she was my grandmother, why didn't my mom ever tell me? The woman hesitated. She thought she was protecting you. When you were little, something happened. Margaret tried to keep you safe, but there were people who didn't want that. His hands curled into fists. And that man, the one who was following us. She glanced toward the dark street where he had disappeared. He was part of it. Maybe even the reason you were taken from her. The boy swallowed hard. A part of him wanted to chase after the man, demand answers, make him explain why he had spent his whole life without knowing any of this. But deep down, he knew he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The woman sighed. Margaret left something for you, she said, reaching into her bag again. This time, she pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. She wrote this for you. Every day, hoping she'd find you again. He hesitated before taking it, his fingers tracing the worn edges. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried a lifetime of words he had never heard, memories he had never shared. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. But Margaret believed in you. She believed you'd find the answers when you were ready. The boy clutched the journal to his chest. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But for the first time, he felt something shift inside him, something that felt like belonging. As they walked away from the alley, the night air felt different. Lighter. Maybe the past wasn't finished with him yet. Maybe there were still more pieces of the puzzle to uncover. But for now, he knew one thing. Margaret had never stopped looking for him. And now, finally, he would start looking for her, too. His stomach twisted. The feeling of being followed, the unease from the bus, the mysterious note, it all came crashing together. This wasn't over, not even close. And whoever was out there, they weren't finished with him yet. The boy's breath